Hello, everyone. I'm thrilled to introduce my guest today, Andrea Koppel. Andrea was a correspondent for CNN before entering the nonprofit sector. Her father is the legendary Ted Koppel, the former anchor of Nightline on ABC News, a program I grew up with and love to watch every night. Today, Andrea is a career coach dedicated to helping confused college students, new grads, and young professionals build meaningful careers they'll love. Andrea is also the host of Time for Coffee, an Apple Top 100 podcast where she interviews successful professionals across different industries. And earlier this year, Andrea was selected as one of the top job search experts to follow on LinkedIn. Andrea, welcome to Write with Impact.
Glenn, thank you so much. I am psyched to be here.
That's wonderful. And do you have your coffee, by the way? Because I have mine.
Oh gosh, it is 8 o'clock in the evening here, Glenn. If I had any coffee at this hour, I would not sleep. But I have coffee with me most of the day.
That's right. Well, I thought you'd be prepared, but I get it. You have a good excuse. You have a good reason not to have coffee. It's morning for me here in Taipei, and it says Taipei, by the way. See?
I see that. Very nice.
Okay. So before we dive into a couple of questions I'd like to ask, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
So I am currently on my fourth or fifth career in my fourth or fifth industry, depending upon how you count. As you mentioned, I started off as a journalist. I did that for about 20 years. Then I pivoted into public relations as the head of communications, as senior vice president at a boutique consulting firm. And then I pivoted into the nonprofit world where I spent 7 years. And then 4 years ago in 2017, I quit my last job because my son was then 13 years old and I wanted to deepen my relationship with him. And I thought, well, I'll be a stay-at-home mom and I'll figure out what comes next. And because I finally had radical headspace, I was able to dream, Glenn. And I ended up deciding to start Time for Coffee as a way to help Gen Z, the young people who are currently in college and young professionals, to level the playing field for them so that they could have access to amazing career advice 24/7 just by pressing play. And it was through doing these interviews. I've now interviewed probably 300 or so professionals that I would say after about 80 interviews, I started seeing all the cross-cutting patterns. And I said, why am I not hearing this kind of career advice out there? And that's when I decided to become a career coach.
That's great. That's tremendous. No, I really enjoy your podcast and your daily video updates on LinkedIn, which are very authentic and unscripted, or at least they sound that way. You're very prolific. You're there pretty much almost every day.
Well, I'll tell you, and I know we're going to get into this a little bit later, but one of the pieces of advice that I have pretty much for anybody who is watching or listening to this show is that you need to build your personal brand. Your company has a brand. Your personal brand will stay with you no matter what company you go to work for. And one of the best ways that you can build your personal brand is by posting on LinkedIn. And I was very late to this game, Glenn. I didn't start posting on a daily basis until October of 2020, but I have done it every day since then. And we're doing this interview right now in the middle of June 2021.
Oh, that's tremendous. If I were to just stumble upon you for the very first time today, I would have thought you look like you've been doing this a very long time, but I'm actually quite shocked, to be totally honest, that you're telling me that you sort of got a real start in just last October, barely a year ago. I've been doing this. I've been on LinkedIn oversharing since 2014. I've been writing on LinkedIn, and I did pause a little bit, but I was consistently on LinkedIn for about 5 years, took a pause, and now I'm back again. But I am quite surprised because it looks like you have been doing this for a long time.
Oh, well, I
Seriously.
very much appreciate those kind words, and that's why I say
Yeah.
I was late to the game.
Right. But you're never too late. And that's the point, right? You're not late to the game.
I think perhaps that is an accurate statement. But I would say, in terms of really getting into LinkedIn, it's now becoming a more crowded space.
Hmm.
There are 740 million active users
Right.
of LinkedIn. Only 1% of us, though, Glenn, which is still 74 million,
Right.
are posting on a weekly basis.
That's right.
That's still 74 million people. So
Hmm.
it is becoming a
Hmm.
more crowded space. When you got in, I
Right.
bet your posts were really getting a ton of visibility.
Right. Yeah, no, I did. And there are a number of reasons behind that. And I could tell you about that later. But today, let's talk about your advice for, what advice do you give brand new college graduates who are confused about what career to pursue as a post grad?
That is a fantastic question. And let me begin by saying I was a political science major with a concentration in Asian studies and Mandarin Chinese. I never went into government. I never went into higher education teaching political science. And yet, it was still a really valuable degree for me to get. I zigged and zagged throughout my career. I tell those young people who are about to graduate or who have just graduated not to think of this first step as being the first step in their capital C career, like the career that they're going to have for the rest of their lives. Instead, think of it as just a first step, as an opportunity for you to try on different jobs for size. Because what happens in our careers, and I'd be curious, Glenn, if the same has happened to you, is that you start off in one place and you may meet somebody either at work or in your personal life who ends up opening your eyes to another type of job
That's right.
that you didn't know of before. And as a result, you either decide, gosh, I'm going to go try that other job. It may be in a different industry. Or you say, I'm going to stay put where I am now. And maybe your life circumstances change. Maybe you need to move closer to home. Maybe you need to go overseas. And so life will happen. We all saw that
Yeah.
during the pandemic, right? We got thrown a major curveball. You cannot look into a crystal ball and predict what's going to happen tomorrow, let alone what's going to happen a year from now. So just take one step, try it out, and see where you are a year from now.
Yeah, that's excellent advice and absolutely true. Um, Absolutely true. My second major job out of college, I never would have guessed I would go into advertising. And you know why I got into advertising?
No,
Two reasons. One is I saw an ad in the newspaper hiring, for a position, an account executive, and so I applied. And the other reason was because I wanted to get the heck out of my current job at the time. So I didn't study advertising. I was an Asian studies major. I studied Chinese and Japanese, and I didn't really study a trade. And I was a liberal arts major, which I had a great time. I loved it, but I didn't really know what I wanted to do. And so that was sort of my first major job out of college, is advertising. I didn't study that. They didn't even have advertising classes at Cornell where I went.
Exactly. And in fact, I have a hack for our young viewers and listeners. And that is, take a sheet of paper and make 3 columns. In the first column, write down all of your hard skills, all of your technical skills. In the second column, write down all of your soft skills. These are the interpersonal skills. And in the third column, write down your interests, your hobbies, the extracurriculars that you had, whether in high school or college, that lit you up, that fill you with energy, that make you happy. And then look for jobs, the kind of job function that aligns with those hard and soft skills. So whether that's project management, communications, marketing, finance, fill in the blank, and then use the activities, the hobbies that light you up as the industries to go into,
Hmm.
because all those job functions
Mm-hmm.
are cross-cutting.
Mm-hmm.
And that is how you can take that first step.
Mm-hmm. No, that's great. That's great advice. That's wonderful. And thank you for sharing that. Hopefully you won't share all of your coaching secrets on this podcast, but I'm all ears, and I'll publish whatever you want to say. But anyway, maybe let's move on to another question that I had, which was, so what do you think are the biggest misunderstandings for college students around how to find and land a job they'll like, but alone love?
Okay, so those who are thinking that they have to find the perfect job, that
Mhm.
perfect first step, that perfect first job, I'm going to burst your bubble. And I'm going to tell you that even though there are those of us who are in jobs and careers that we love, they're not perfect. There is no such thing as a perfect job.
Hmm.
And I also want you to know there is no secret, there is no recipe
Mhm.
that you can follow to find that job you're going to love. And
Mhm.
what do I mean by that?
That's right.
I mean, it's not like you can go on to recipes.com for careers and find that, consulting for McKinsey, and you do this and then you do that and you get your mozzarella and your tomato sauce and your Parmesan cheese and your ground beef, and you mix it up and you put it in the oven at 375 and you take it out, and there is your perfect consulting job at McKinsey with a crispy crust. No. Instead, finding a job that you will love is more like being a mad scientist.
Mm.
You're going to be in a laboratory with your test tubes
Oh,
and your Bunsen burner
yeah.
and your goggles,
Yeah.
and you're going to be putting a little bit of this and a little bit of that into the test tubes,
Right.
like a scientist trying to find the right formula.
Mhm.
Why do I say that? Because each of us is a unique formula.
Mhm.
What lights me up, what is the right job that plays to my strengths, that appeals to my interests, isn't necessarily the same kind of job that's going to appeal to Glenn or to you. And the only way that you can find that job that's going to really light you up is by trying and testing and iterating. But you must go out and try these jobs.
That's right.
And that's how you find it.
That's right. That's fantastic. I like lasagna metaphor for McKinsey. We don't make a lot of lasagna at McKinsey, but we probably should.
No.
That's very good advice. I'm going to take that over to my colleagues and see what they say about that. No, that's great advice. That's fantastic. That's so true. I'll leave it at that right now, rather than going into my story. I'll talk about some other time, but that's fantastic and very truthful. You have a different perspective though around the age-old advice to new grads that they should, quote, follow their passion. Sounds good. Sounds like very authentic, powerful advice, but it sounds like you have a different take on that. What is that?
So the reason that I do not tell new grads to follow their passion is that most 20 somethings, let's say 21, 22, 23-year-olds, haven't yet identified their professional passion. They may have a ton of personal passions, namely either the same sex or the opposite sex, but they haven't yet identified their professional passion. So instead, what I say is to follow their interests. Going back to that piece of paper with the 3 columns, follow your interests into an industry that you like and lean into your strengths. You may not love that first job. There may be aspects about it that you find interesting and other aspects that you downright hate.
Right.
But that is the process
Right.
that we all go through
Oh,
to find the right fit.
absolutely. No, that has to, hopefully the clients or the students, the young people that you coach, that you work with, understand that. Hopefully that reduces the pressure on them quite a bit, because if they think they have to get it right, hit a home run, whatever there's a baseball metaphor for it, right out of the, right after they graduate, if there's that kind of pressure, that's really too much. That's not necessary. And they look at their peers, right? They look at their classmates landing a job with, ABC company, XYZ company, with a little bit of name and, brand, and they're not, for whatever reason. Maybe they feel bad. Don't feel bad. Don't feel bad. That's my advice. I'm gonna insert my advice a little bit. There's
Oh, it's fantastic advice. And
yeah.
part of the problem that the young people of today are dealing with, that you and I didn't have to contend with, Glenn, is that they are catching snippets on Instagram, on Snapchat, sometimes on Twitter, or even on LinkedIn, in which their classmates, their friends
Right.
are talking about all the great stuff that's
Right.
happening in their job.
Right.
And what I tell my clients is, you're only getting to see what they want to show you.
That's
I
right.
guarantee you, there are parts of their jobs
Yeah.
that suck too.
Oh yeah.
I have interviewed people at all levels,
Absolutely.
who are extremely successful. And they, at that stage of their career, usually will drop their guard and admit that there are parts of their current job that they do not enjoy. That is just the reality. What you want to do is try to find a job in which the good outweighs the stuff
Right.
that you don't enjoy.
That's right. And remember, when we started out, when we graduated, number one, we didn't even have the internet. We didn't have even a mobile phone, let alone a smartphone. We didn't even have a dumb phone. I think we had rotary dial, like the little pulse dial. We didn't have all of that. And that was, that was a different world then. I'm dating myself, at least. I don't know about you. But
I didn't have electricity when I was growing up, Glenn. I'm kidding. I'm
okay.
kidding.
You got me on
it
that.
wasn't quite that
I
bad.
know.
It wasn't quite that bad.
Yeah.
And the truth is, we were lucky that we didn't have all of that, because to your earlier point, there is a tremendous amount of stress, psychological stress,
That's right.
emotional stress on college students today, not only because they think everyone else has the better job, but also because they have enormous debt that they need to pay off.
Right. Right. So everything you say though is very true. And that's wonderful. It's very helpful. Suppose though a new grad is confused about what direction to head in first because they're interested in several different industries, which makes sense. And they don't want to make a mistake, which is of course very
Mm.
understandable. What advice can you offer them?
So one of the things that I do with my students who take the College2Career boot camp, which is a weekend boot camp to get them career clarity and then teach them the skills that they need to find the jobs and then land them, is to identify at least 3 industries that they'd be interested in exploring,
Sure.
3 types of jobs in
Right.
those industries. And the reason that I do that is that you're hedging your bets. But then you want to pick a lane. So whichever job company comes back to you first with an offer that seems good, go there. You can't make a mistake.
Mm-hmm.
I believe, and based on the hundreds of people that I've interviewed, you can't make a mistake in your first job, in your second job, maybe even in your third job, because it's all a process of learning.
That's right.
Even the fails, even the face plants, I would say are some of the greatest opportunities where you'll learn. There was a post recently
Mm-hmm.
on, was it Twitter? Maybe it was, no, I don't know if it was on Twitter or LinkedIn, Glenn, in which, uh, what was the company? Was it Netflix or one company that was saying an intern of ours basically accidentally sent out an email and we're working with them to help them understand what they did and whatnot. And then all of these other professionals have been posting, oh God, when I was an intern, I, screwed up in the biggest way. And these are people who have gone on to have successful careers. I'm
Right.
not saying that you're just gonna make a big mistake, or when you make a big mistake as an intern, that's okay. In your entry level jobs, people expect you to make mistakes even farther along. You're gonna make a mistake. You're going to have face plants.
Right.
Just learn from them and don't make the same mistake twice.
Right. That's a very good advice, by the way. That's what I tell some of the people on my team. Um, you know, they can make mistakes, but don't do it again.
That's right. Try not to.
And learn from it. It's a learning experience. And I think as a leader or manager, hopefully a leader or manager could share that guidance when that happens. And it does happen, believe me, it does happen to all of us, right?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, that's great. That would be a different episode someday. But anyway, I'm wondering if you don't mind. That's fantastic, Andrea. Fantastic advice for new grads, for young professionals, kind of trying to figure out where to go, how to make their way. Maybe they just graduated, or maybe summer is kicking in right now, and they're trying to think, what do I do? So thank you for that. I appreciate that.
Sure.
Hopefully, some of my listeners will appreciate that. And this is the kind of advice I know that would resonate certainly on with a LinkedIn community, which I love. And I'll share some of this, of course, with the community on LinkedIn. But I'm wondering if we could shift gears a bit and talk about writing, which is a topic that it's in my my podcast is about writing, and I love to talk about it. And I'm just wondering, what do you think about, what's your view on the importance of writing well for new grads, young professionals, and what kind of practical tips would you have for them? But first, let's talk about why is writing a valuable skill to have for new grads?
I would say, even in a world where text messaging is ubiquitous, being able to write complete sentences, being able to express your thoughts, whether you're an engineer, an educator, or an executive in the C suite, is foundational. You have to know how to craft a basic email. You have to know how to write a letter. You need to be able to put words on a piece of paper and convey your thoughts in a clear and simple way. And as to what advice I have, I would say you learn by doing.
Hmm.
And whether it's writing in a journal where no one else is going to see it, writing a blog that you start, anybody can start it. It's super easy to do. Whether it's writing for your school newspaper
Hmm.
or whether it's pitching articles to another blog or another media outlet.
Hmm.
You need to do it, even if you don't want to be a journalist. So I'm
Right.
saying this to those of you who aren't necessarily interested in journalism.
Right.
This is a foundational skill to learn how to express yourself clearly and
Right.
succinctly in writing.
Right. Now, that's great advice. I know, I kind of stumbled into my career as a communications expert, which and an editor later, and I didn't plan for that. It's one of those things where I did not plan for that as an undergrad. Um, and to be totally honest, I didn't really take any writing courses. I never took any journalism courses. Um, but I did take courses that required writing. So I did do a lot of writing in college, and I did very well, and I worked very hard at it. So that was very helpful. So that skill of writing that I acquired in college was very, very, it turned out to be probably like the number one skill that I've used even to this day.
Hmm.
So, and I didn't really even take an explicit writing course, but I did have to write, right? For my Shakespeare course, right? I had to write an essay or, a course on Russian literature. It was, which taught in English, or French literature, history, of course, a lot of history, a lot of writing in history. So I was, I took a lot of liberal arts, unmarketable liberal arts courses, which turned out to be, these skills turned out to be marketable. So I'm being slightly facetious when I say unmarketable liberal arts skills. They actually become very marketable, very useful. So if any of you are
Oh,
hearing me,
completely.
please hear beyond my facetiousness and hear that I'm quite serious, that what you have learned or you're learning now can be very, very powerfully useful.
Completely. And Glenn, it's wonderful that you mentioned some of the classes, whether it's French literature or Shakespeare,
Yeah,
or whether it's philosophy or psychology or
absolutely.
any of the liberal arts history.
Yeah,
So many people, like our parents or their generation, would look at that and say, what are you going to do?
that's right.
And even today, what are you going to do
Yeah,
with that liberal arts degree? It's far more practical
yeah,
to study business,
that's
to
right.
study economics,
That's right.
to study engineering,
Right.
medicine, become a lawyer, whatever.
All
But
right.
I am telling you, some of the most important skills that you will need in any industry
That's right.
are drawn from critical thinking, your ability to write clearly and to communicate in an effective way, and just to kind of have exposure to other subjects that broaden your mind and help you think expansively.
Absolutely. No, all very, very true. And speaking of business, look, I'm all for studying business as an undergraduate. My son is doing that, and I'm very supportive. But to be honest, I never studied business as an undergrad, and I ended up in business. And I learned about business through graduate school. I went to business school later, several years after I graduated. So that's how I learned about business, but not as an undergrad. I actually never took. In fact, to be honest, I actually took a business class and I dropped it because I thought it was too boring.
Well, I will tell you, full confession, my lowest grade in college
Yeah.
was in a microeconomics class I had. It was so boring. I actually do not remember
Okay.
anything from that class.
Yeah.
And I should have started with macro. I don't know why I went into micro.
I know. No, don't get me started on that. I did take microeconomics and I did take macroeconomics as an undergrad because those are sort of the proxy or substitute business classes for liberal arts colleges. You know, I went to a liberal arts school, and they didn't really have business classes, and so it's micro and macro, and I did very badly. Those were my worst grades. I got all A's in every single course except for micro and macro. I hated it.
Hey, I feel a kinship here.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Let's get back. Let's get back to the topic. Okay. So speaking of writing, so I think you've established the importance of writing. I can't say enough about that, and I've written a little bit about that over the years. But anyway, and I'll definitely I'll need to write about it again because I think I'll just say one more thing. I feel I've seen a lot of graduates. Some can write really really well, and some actually I was quite surprised that they require more practice. And it's learnable, by the way. So don't feel like you can't improve. So on that note, how do you improve? So my next question to you, Andrea, is, what would be the 3 or 4 or 5 pieces of advice you would give new grads or young professionals to help them improve their writing beyond just doing it and practicing? Okay, we get that, and I hear that all the time. And you could say that, you're allowed to say that, but it could be anything. And by the way, it could be anything from writing a resume or cover letter, which are critical pieces, as you know. I assume that you work with your clients or your students on that. Or it could be writing content on their LinkedIn profile. Could be writing a LinkedIn post or a longer form article showcasing their interest and expertise. You just mentioned earlier, writing a blog. Could be on LinkedIn, or it could be somewhere else, on Medium or wherever, or all of the above. So what do you advise?
Well, you probably hear this advice too. I would say read the great writers. And that's probably more on the fiction side than nonfiction, but there are certainly great nonfiction writers. Wait, it's more on the fiction than nonfiction. There are also great nonfiction writers.
Sure.
But I would say think more Ernest Hemingway than James Joyce. Why do I say that? Because Hemingway wrote simple, clear, declarative sentences.
That's right.
And what I have found, Glenn, I don't know if it's the same thing in the consulting world, but what I have found with many of the young people who either come to work with me as interns or those I coach, so often they have a lot of parenthetical phrases. Their sentences run on and on. It's hard to follow them. I think you just need to crystallize your thought. That doesn't mean that you can't be creative in grabbing someone's attention, let's say, in a LinkedIn post. Absolutely. As I was just saying, there is more and more competition for eyeballs. So you want to think about what is a lead sentence or 2 that is going to make people want to keep reading. For your resume, you want to think differently. Your resume, you want to think about quantifying the impact that you've had in various roles. Don't list out your responsibilities. What did you actually do in the job that moved the needle? Now, for college students, this is tough to do.
That's right.
Because, and maybe even for people who are farther along in their career, because they didn't get a baseline. So that's one thing I tell all new grads. Make sure with every job you get a baseline of where things started and be able to quantify how you move the needle in however small way over the course of your time in that job. You also want to be looking at the job description or the job posting and see what keywords keep coming up when they talk about the qualifications that they're looking for, what the attributes are of the person who would be in this role, what the experience would be, and then you want to try to mirror that language in your resume. When it comes to other writing, I would say, let's say in the about section of your LinkedIn profile, take advantage of that space to put more of your personality into your profile.
All right.
You want to show if you're somebody who's a first gen, if you're somebody who grew up working several jobs while you were in college, maybe you even worked in high school. You want to bring some of your personal experience into the about section.
Mhm.
And that's where you can let some of your interests come out, some of your personal passions, let alone if you have professional passions, and write maybe 3 paragraphs, with the first paragraph summing up the kind of position that you're looking for and where you are in your professional journey or educational journey. And then you can branch out into some of the experiences that you've had over the course of the last however many years.
That's great. That's fantastic advice. Do you recommend to some of your students that you work with to be present on LinkedIn? Because, I notice a lot of students, most are these days, they have an account. Some of them have a fleshed out, a complete profile. Many of them don't. So getting the profile complete is a very important first step. And then there are two things that they can do. One is to curate or share other people's content, which is a good thing to do. That's a good way to get started, sort of get your feet wet, get familiar with how things work. And, it sort of shows that you're engaged and interested. So that's a good thing. But that step beyond that to becoming a creator, one of the very few, actually, percentage wise, do you recommend that, or is that something it depends? The answer would be sort of depends on who you're talking to. So, and by it could be writing a short post, in your feed, you know what I'm talking about, or
Definitely.
a long form article, which, some students go and actually do that. I've seen that, and they get tremendous visibility from that. And I've seen them go on to, great things. It's really quite powerful. And I've actually used that as it attracted me to candidates in the past. When I saw them write under their own name a long form article, I was very impressed.
I agree 100%,
Mhm.
Glenn. One of the things that I work on with my students after we get the career clarity that they need is optimizing their LinkedIn profile. I
Right.
mentioned the about section, but also the headline. And that's the 220 characters that are right underneath your picture,
That's right.
which I highly recommend you get from the waist up, smiling, showing some teeth like this,
Right.
and the city where you want to work.
Mm.
That's another thing that I
Mhm.
recommend, is to put the role that you want. If it's an assistant marketing, whatever, put that, then a slash, then the industry, then a slash, and then what your unique value is. I highly recommend doing that. And then having under your work section, even if it's internships that you're showing or work that you've done in clubs or sports teams, whatever it is, if you had a leadership role, if you had a supporting role, to quantify the impact that you had, because that is your online calling card. It's your online business card. And it is a huge missed opportunity.
Mhm.
Huge. I mean, I would say it is, you are missing out on immense opportunities by not having an optimized LinkedIn profile, because
Mhm.
one of the best ways
Mhm.
to find the 80% of jobs that are not posted on job boards
Mhm.
is through networking
Mm.
and referrals.
Mhm.
So, what is the biggest professional platform? It's LinkedIn. So, I teach my students how to network in a strategic way, not just pressing connect to every
Yeah.
senior vice president, CEO. No.
Right.
So, how they network strategically, and then
Right.
how they have a really kick ass informational
Mm.
interview,
Hmm.
which helps them learn if it's a job that they might like, and to get recommendations for other places to look, not to ask for a job, but other places that they would recommend that you look,
Hmm.
that you might find interesting, and other people that they would recommend you speak with. Because the way that you uncover those hidden jobs is through word of mouth,
That's
through
right.
people telling you about it.
Right.
So it's almost like not having a resume. Would you not have a resume? I mean, that would be nuts, right? Well, not having an optimized LinkedIn profile, I would go so far as to say, is even more of a miss than not having a resume.
That's right. No, that's a great point. I have one question is around what do you recommend students do or young professionals do to network on LinkedIn? Meaning, so for example, I get a lot of requests from young people saying, "Hey, I don't know who they are." They come to me for the very first time and say, and "Look, I understand where they're coming from. By the way, I have a lot of empathy. I'd like to pick your brain. Can we have coffee or virtual coffee? These days for 30 minutes or 20 minutes or whatever." Um, Without telling you how I respond, I'm curious, what do you recommend your students to do to reach out to people that they want to network with, they want to learn from? I can understand that, and that's what LinkedIn is for. But there's got to be some strategies that work and some that don't.
Yeah. Those students who reached out to you for a virtual coffee were not my students, Glenn. I can promise you that,
Okay.
because it is a waste of their time, but more importantly, it is a waste of your time speaking to one college student. That is why you're going to come on the Time for Coffee podcast, and I'm going to interview you. We're going to do basically an extended informational interview,
Right.
because now you'll
Right.
be able to refer
Yeah.
those young people to
Right.
your Time for Coffee
Right.
podcast interview,
That's
which
right.
is basically going to be regurgitating what you would have told them anyway.
Right.
Instead, what I tell my students who are college students, those who've recently graduated, is to reach out to connect with people who are no more than about 10 years older than they are.
Hmm.
And this is the reason I tell them that, because their experience is far more recent and relevant
Right.
to what they're doing now.
That's right.
So many college students, and I get it, they get blinded
Hmm.
by the big titles, and they think somehow or another they're going to get this secret from speaking with a senior vice president or a CEO or a vice president or another C suite executive.
Right.
But no, to pick Glenn's brain, I mean, really and truly, what you want to do is talk to somebody who is currently in the role that you think you want, so that you can say to them, "Hey, can you take me into a typical day?
Hmm.
What are you doing? What kind of software are you using every day or on a weekly basis?
Hmm.
And did you know how to use that software before you started? Or is it something that you're trained to use? Like, do I need to get a certificate in that? Would that be useful for
Right.
me?"
Right.
And you want to listen to the
Yeah.
language that these people who are in those roles right now, or maybe had that job 2 years ago,
Right.
the language that they're using, because it's like you're an investigator. Take notes. When you talk to a hiring manager who is looking to hire for that job at a different company, you can play a lot of that language back. You're going to impress them
That's right.
because what you're going to show them is you get what is going to be needed to succeed in that role.
Now, that's fantastic advice. And thank you for teeing up our conversation on your podcast. I think it's, in a couple of weeks' time or something. And I very much look forward to it. But now I can see, I'm starting to understand the value of what you're doing. Producing these interviews. First of all, I know it takes a lot of work. So kudos to that. I understand that. And you're doing that work on behalf of these students, and you're offering it all for free. I think that's a fantastic service. So thank you on behalf of the students and the young professionals who are struggling, not just struggling, but searching and doing their research. You're doing quite a service to them, for them.
Oh, thank you, Glenn. Well, it is a passion of mine. It really and truly is. I've
Right.
been doing it now
Right.
for 3.5 years.
Yeah.
And I'll also say another thing that young people can get
Mhm.
out of listening to these interviews, even if it's with people who are in industries they think they may not be interested in, is that they are going to learn how to do a really good informational interview.
Mm.
How do you draw people out? Because so often, and I get it, I really get it. You're so kind of like nervous and
Sure.
not really sure what to
Yeah.
do, that you may not be listening to what they're saying,
Yeah.
because half of the secret of doing a really good interview, whether it's informational or a job interview, is really listening to what the person across the desk or across the Zoom screen is saying.
Right. That's right. By the way, do you advise your students to show up on time for their interviews?
I advise them to show up early,
Exactly. That
at least
my
10
advice,
minutes early.
my advice to my son and to others that I care about is don't ever be on time. Don't be on time. Be early. Right?
Absolutely. And I would go so far as to say the same thing holds true when you get the job, when
Right.
there are meetings,
Oh yeah.
especially as the junior member of
That's
whatever
right.
team you're on.
That's right.
You want to get there early
Yeah.
and watch the way that people like Glenn are acting in these meetings,
Right.
the way that they are interacting with their colleagues, the kinds of questions that they ask. You can learn a huge amount
That's
by
right.
watching the more experienced people in the room.
That's right. Little bit, one more question, then I'll let you go back to interviewing others professionals and also doing what you do, which is fantastic work. And I highly recommend people listen to your fantastic podcast, and also follow you and connect with you on LinkedIn, because you're doing great work. But one more question was around your own writing process. What do you do? I mean, you were a broadcast journalist for CNN for many years. So I imagine there was some writing, in preparation for your interviews and your reporting. And then today you seem to be you are a prolific content creator. How do you write?
So I would say that my experience, having worked as a broadcast journalist for CNN, where I would write at least one script a day,
Wow.
sometimes two,
Oh my.
and I would maybe be doing sometimes 10, sometimes 20 live shots in a day. I had to learn to write very quickly, and that's why I talk about that lead sentence. Sometimes I would get stuck on that, and I always start with my lead sentence, and then the rest flows from there. But by doing it over and over and over again, I thought maybe, hold on a second here. Oh, excuse me. It's like lifting weights, okay? The more that you do the reps, The more that you write, and when you write on a daily basis or multiple times in a week, you may start off with the wimpy 3 pound weight, but as time goes on, suddenly this is going to be super light and you're going to be able to increase the weight.
Right.
And instead of writing once on LinkedIn, you'll be able to write twice a day or
Mhm.
3 times a day. And I can tell you, Glenn, my process, I wish I could say that I always only wrote all my posts on one day
Mhm.
that week or shot all my videos on one day. But the reality of my life is that sometimes I've had the luxury of being able to record everything on one day or write it on one day. And then there are other weeks where I'm flying by the seat of my pants and I'm sitting down and I get an idea and I write it out. But I do keep a Google sheet full of ideas.
Right.
And I have uh, a diary in which I also write down ideas for future posts. And I'm somebody who has learned to write very, very quickly because I have to do it every day. And I love it. I really enjoy it. I really enjoy the act of trying to craft something that is going to be meaningful to my audience, that will help them in some way, provide them with some value, whether it's just pumping them up to keep muscling through the week, or whether it's providing actionable tips that they can take to write posts on LinkedIn, which I've done, or network or do informational interviews or optimize their LinkedIn profile. So I enjoy the process of writing.
That's great. That's a great comment to end on, if you don't mind. It sounds like that you've shared so much advice. Like I said, I hope you've left enough for your coaching clients. Otherwise, I think you've given it all away for free on this podcast. So maybe we should charge for this podcast. But how can people interested in working with you as a career coach? You are a career coach. How can they find you?
Well, I would say connect with me on LinkedIn. Just put a little note saying, hey, I heard you on Glenn's podcast or anything. And I'd love to connect with you. It's a very rare person whose connection request I don't accept. Usually it's because I think they're trying to sell me something. And then we can DM, we can direct message and get on a strategy call to talk about how I can be most helpful to you.
That's great. I saw I saw on your website you can book a time with you. Sort of, is it a free strategy call?
It is actually, you can also go to the Time for Coffee website.
Right.
That's time, the number 4, coffee.org. Go to the coaching tab and you'll see you can book a free career strategy session with me. So either way, you can find me.
That's great. Well, I hope this podcast doesn't generate too much demand and make you too busy, because it is summer and you do want to relax. I know I saw you were on vacation recently. I saw your videos from that and photos from that. So
Yes.
enjoy your summer somewhat if you can, before it gets too hectic. I'm sure things are going to ramp up pretty quickly for you as the new school season kicks into gear.
Yes, and I'm actually going to have a new offering for sophomores, juniors, and seniors
Oh,
beginning October. I haven't gotten the hard date yet, but it will be early October. I'm going to have a group coaching package that I'll be rolling out, so
right.
you can become part of a small cohort of other students, and we'll get you career clarity and get you ahead of the game in terms of networking and informational interviews to land internships and jobs.
That's right. Good point. Wow, Andrea, thanks a lot. It was a lot of fun. I learned a lot, and hopefully this is helpful to people who are listening or watching or reading this. But thank you so much for all you do for young professionals, for students out there. I was in their shoes. I know what it's like. I was confused. I was nervous. And so thanks for what you're doing to help them.
Oh gosh, it has been such a pleasure, Glenn. I loved being a guest, and I'm just excited to have the opportunity to interview you in coming weeks.
Looking forward to it. Definitely. Just throw me a few questions so I can prepare in advance.
Will do.
Okay. Thanks.